Well, so alongside the multitude of organisations and websites that are dedicated to learning for sustainability or learning for sustainability education in Scotland, there's also a multitude of websites that equally focus on global citizenship education. Now, naturally, the two work hand in hand. They work in tandem, essentially, global citizenship as well as learning for sustainability. Both are integral as part of the Agenda 2030 educational resources that are becoming ever more prominent in Scotland as time progresses through this decade. But this website here in particular, I wanted to address because in the past I have gone over parts of it in passing, but I've never focused on it solely. And the reason that I want to focus on it tonight is because there's a publication that I was reading through earlier on today that I just found remarkable because it harkens back to the climate change video that I uploaded earlier on today, which was about children, political grooming. And had I not rambled for God knows how long and ended up making a half-hour video, I could have incorporated the two together, but instead I'll just make them separate. But just to give people a bit of an idea as to what this website entails, just to be brief about it if I can, their members list, for example, it gives you a bit of insight as to just how many different groups are all working to achieve the same goals. Things such as Oxfam Scotland, ScotDic, Aberdeen for a Fairer World. We've got Highland One World, very creepy name, Eco School Scotland, Take One Action. We've got UNICEF, there's no smoke without fire, Scottish Fair Trade Forum, International Development Alliance. We've also got Teach the Future Scotland, Quakers in Scotland, Christian Aid Scotland, One World Centre Dundee. Now there's obviously other websites that I've covered and I've seen in passing, etc., that aren't incorporated here or included there, but that's still a large number of different organisations all working together under the banner of Ideas for Global Citizenship. So they say here that global citizenship is defined as a way of living that recognises our world as an increasingly complex web of connections and interdependencies, a world in which our choices and actions may have repercussions for people and communities locally, nationally or internationally. And global citizenship nurtures personal respect and respect for others wherever they live. It encourages individuals to think deeply and critically about what is equitable and just and what will minimise harm to our planet. Exploring global citizenship themes helps learners grow more confident in standing up for their beliefs and more skilled in evaluating the ethics and the impact of their decisions. All Ideas members have in common our commitment to global citizenship education and to promote this both in Scotland and beyond. Fully recognising that GCE has evolved out of development education, as is evident in our name. As a network, we acknowledge there have been many harmful agendas, historically and contemporary, in the name of development. Our members approach global citizenship education through a critical lens, of course they do, informed by a decolonial theory. Now, of course, what is that? Well, that's a word I wasn't really familiar with, but in layman's terms, or just a quick search, will give you the definition of it being a phrase coined to describe the intellectual work articulating a broad rejection of Western European supremacy by colonial/racial subjects. It's remarkable. So it's good to know that these organisations working to achieve global citizenship for all, they've got their priorities in order. And every time I start recording a video, somebody fucking DMs me. Anyway, so it also says, down here, that a global citizen is defined as somebody who is aware of the wider world and has a sense of their own role as a world citizen. They respect and value diversity. They have an understanding of how the world works. They're outraged by social injustice. It's not enough to be aware and, agree with social justice. No. You have to be actively outraged by social injustice. You have to participate in the community at a range of levels, from local to the global. Be willing to act to make the world a more equitable and sustainable place, and to take responsibility for their actions. Yeah, or your actions even. It's then claimed, of course, that global citizenship education is required because of the interconnected and interdependent nature of our world. The global is not out there. It is part of our everyday lives, as we are linked to others on every continent, socially and culturally through the media, and through travel and migration, economically through trade, environmentally through sharing one planet, and politically through international relations and systems of regulation. The opportunities our fast-changing globalised world offers young people are enormous, but so too are the challenges, with young people being entitled to an education that equips them with the knowledge, skills and values that they're going to need in order to embrace the opportunities and challenges they encounter and to create the kind of world that they want to live in. An education that supports their development as global citizens. Yeah. The active participatory methods of education for global citizenship help young people to learn how decisions made by people in other parts of the world affect our lives, just as our decisions affect the lives of others. It also promotes pupil participation in the learning process and in decision making for the following reasons. Everything done in school sends out messages, so we need to exemplify the values we wish to promote. If we wish to affirm beliefs about the equality of all human beings and the importance of treating everyone fairly and with respect, we need to ensure that learning processes and relationships between pupil and teacher reflect and reinforce those values. Research shows that in more democratic schools, pupils feel more in control of their learning. And of course, the UNCRC gets a mention. What a shock. It's never far away from every single one of these groups and their professed vision of the future, or visions for the future, ideas for the future even. Where it says, of course, the UNCRC, which is short for obviously, affirms the right of children to have their opinions taken into account on matters that affect them. Yeah, okay. And it just so happens that every manufactured crisis or issue or obstacle that they profess exists in this world in turn requires these children to then be educated to adapt accordingly. Concluding this part here by saying that global citizenship education deals with issues of global interdependence, diversity of identities and cultures, sustainable development, of course, peace and conflict, and inequities of power, resource and respect. And as we all begin to embellish in the concept of a climate crisis, you will come to find, if you've not already heard it at some point, that as we move forward and we deal with the climate crisis, the aftermath, it will be a fair and equitable and socially just world, etc., where power is split more evenly. That in theory, of course. What they really mean is that they are going to strip the power of the West or make them weaker as a bloc, as a collective. But individually as nations, we will also become weaker. It's all about that equity. And then when we talk about food insecurity, there's another one. You've probably heard the term food inequity or food equity. Well, that will be about reducing our intake in order to apparently give to the lesser off nations of this world, when again really just sounds more like, and it more unlikely is just an excuse to reduce our ability to consume foods that we need, such as meat and dairy, or limited anyway. It then says here that the GCE, or the Global Citizenship Education, is embedded within the Curriculum for Excellence. Of course it is. Of course. So it's essentially SMP rubber stamped as part of Learning for Sustainability. This framework encompasses a wide range of interconnected themes and approaches across sustainable development education, outdoor learning, global citizenship, and social welfare. And then to finish off this point here, I think there was another paragraph. It's crucial to be aware that far from promoting one set of answers or values or attitudes, global citizenship education encourages children and young people to explore, develop and express their own values and opinions, always requiring too that they listen to and respect other people's points of view. This is an important step towards children and young people making informed choices as to how they exercise their own rights and their responsibilities to others. There's always this talk of children critically thinking. They love to profess that they're promoting critical thought, and these children have to not only know about their rights, be informed about their rights, but it'll be them making the fundamental decisions. They need to know how to take everything into account and make decisions accordingly. Political decisions that will affect our world. But I genuinely think that this picture here, this meme, if you will, truly puts it all into the one little image for you all to see. The things that I've tried to put across, and I've ended up rambling for countless minutes trying to get the statement across. This sums it up perfectly for me. When I've been speaking about political grooming, or when they talk about critical thought, introducing all these issues to children at very young ages, and then pretending that the children have come up with the recommendations or the decisions or the solutions themselves. Nah, all that talk of the cabinet meetings, the cabinet takeovers where these kids are all bum rushed in to meet Nicola Dunlips and the gang so they can provide them with some recommendations. The government will play the role of pretending to give a shit for 20 to 30 minutes or however long these meetings last for. Then of course they'll go their separate ways. The children will wonder to themselves if the policies that they've recommended will really be implemented in upcoming elections or whatever it may be. Whereas Nicola Dunlips and John Swinney on their way back to their taxpayer funded sofas, the only thing that they'll really be talking about is whether or not the education resources were a success or not. Were the recommendations up to par, or could there have been a bit more, or could there have been a bit more, infiltration or indoctrination, so to speak. But this picture here, of course you're allowed to ask questions. Here's a list of approved questions. You're absolutely free to study and investigate for yourself. Here's a list of approved sources. We're not trying to stifle thought. We want you to learn everything you can as you reach the approved conclusions. And really, to me, this is the perfect picture to encapsulate the climate crisis / emergency video that I made earlier on, with these children that are being brandished as investigators, and they're teamed up with experts, and they create recommendations upon delving into the hot topic of climate change, or should I say the climate crisis. And then it's met with appraisal and encouragement to continue by the government. And the recommendations are accepted either in part or in full, all of them. And it's been branded as very encouraging, when the reality of the matter is these children have only got the knowledge that has been provided to them by the very people that are exploiting them. And it's manipulation to its fucking core. It's the most blatant example, time after time, and I've said it time after time, of political grooming. Clear as day, but this picture, as I say, just perfectly summarises it. Perfectly. But speaking of climate change, that's one of the publications that this website has produced at some point, and I was having a read through it earlier on, and it's just gives you a bit of insight as to what is being taught in some classroom settings, because obviously it's up to the teacher in question at any given school, despite the fact they're all essentially now, if they weren't already, I don't know how long this was encouraged in schools in general, but now they have according to the General Teaching Council, the teachers are forced essentially to teach this shit, but at their own pace. It's up to them what and when certain topics get discussed, but that doesn't negate from the fact that they have to promote it now. But they've got a publication here called Exploring Climate Justice. Now, climate justice is something I've heard being trotted about time after time after time. It became a lot more prevalent around about COP and after COP, but it's grown arms and legs as time has gone on. Climate justice, the Climate Justice Fund, or an initiative, Scotland being one of the first countries, if not the first country in the world to adopt the Climate Justice Fund, which essentially boils down to us redistributing a certain amount of our annual income or wealth, Scotland's wealth, to Pakistan, Malawi and Zambia, or just nations that are a lot less wealthy than Scotland. And the reason that we do this, of course, is because we're helping them mitigate for the impending doom of climate change. And the other reason that we do it is, in part, it's reparations, essentially, because we're responsible for climate change, according to the people peddling this fucking nonsense. So we're redistributing our wealth because we're responsible. So we're essentially atoning for our sins in some capacity. But as time has progressed, it's moved into the realms of it's racial justice now. So climate justice is social justice, and it's gender justice, and it's racial justice, and the list goes on. So as time has gone on, it's become less about apparently helping poorer nations mitigate climate change impacts, and more onto the same proverbial BS you would expect to see anybody else, whether it's a feminist publication or an anti-racist publication, etc. It's just the same nonsense. It's the same nonsense. Anyway, a human rights-based approach, so it's important. So let's get a wee look at this. So this is just one of many examples. I have admittedly found it difficult over the months, even the years, to come across a good variety. For fuck's sake, there he is. It's not every time. A good variety of, examples of how this sort of information, whether it be sustainable development related or global citizenship related, how it's presented to children, how it comes across in a classroom format. But you do get a bit of an insight as to what's being promoted in the classroom when you read through some of these publications, because naturally, hypothetically speaking, it would be a teacher that would go through this and then adopt some of the things that are suggested within to their classroom when they talk about, activities to potentially do with the class. Things like that, which you'll come to see. But this resource would not be possible without the time and energy of all our key partners, expressing Diana Ellis from WASDEC, Professor Ali Watson, and Bennett Collins from the Third Generation Project. Stephen Hendry, Dr. Stephen Hendry, the snooker player. Now he's a Royal Society of Chemistry. Sylvia Sabino Hunt from ScotDec, and Sue Bentley from Ecoactive Learning. And a special thanks goes to WASDEC for their kind contribution. Yada yada. And of course they want to thank SOMACT, the amazing group of young Somali journalists dedicated to giving a voice to marginalised communities in Somaliland. Fucking hell. The resource is very well put together. The importance of education is inclusive and recognises intersectionality will be pivotal, and is something I, as a recent high school leaver, would have benefited from massively, especially in late primary school. Oh, especially in late primary school, It would help young people become more aware of the world around them in their own community and globally. Always use emphasis on community, and it does harken back to communitarianism, which is something that there is elements of that at play here. I mean, always, even hear it in S&P rhetoric or Hollywood rhetoric, always referring to communities, whether it's through the prism of the marginalised groups. So you've got your LGBT communities, you've got your feminism community, the BAME community, etc. But more importantly, it's talking about communities on a local level. So, the community around you, your 20-minute neighbourhood, the community, or the Highland community, or the Indonesian community, etc. You get the point. But it says here that climate change is not something which will wait around to be learned about, so including it in the curriculum at an early stage will be life-changing for many. Oh, is that so? Is that so? And again, I'm just going to quickly go back to that photo, because it really does ring true when you hear bullshit like that. It really does. Oops. Fucking thing. So anyway, that's from Teach the Future Scotland Review, which they reviewed this thing. So it was a publication has been produced with the assistance of the EU, of course. Oh wow, that's a new one. Not really, but anyway, and Oxfam. So getting into this a bit more. What is climate justice? Climate justice and global citizenship education, and then structure resource. We've got CFE experiences and outcomes, links to the SDGs and UNCRC, etc. So let's see. So I found this interesting right off the bat. Introduces you to what they define as climate justice. And it says that in 2012, so this was even before Nicola Thinlips was the First Minister, this was during Alex Salmond's reign. And it didn't take me long after I started digging into the SNP, just the Scottish Government in general, that I realised that fat prick was full of it. By that point he'd gone anyway, but I was never under any illusions because I was never an SNP voter to begin with, but did not take me long to realise that he was not much better at all. He was just a bit more subtle about it. He would do things in the background, whereas Nicola Thinlips admittedly does things in the background, but her thin-lipped mouth does her no favours. And there's a helicopter flying right overhead, so I'm going to have to pause this until it buggers off. In 2012, the Rainbow Unicorn government was one of the first countries in the world to set up a climate justice fund to tackle the effects of climate change. For the Scottish Government, climate justice is about recognising that the poor and vulnerable at home and overseas are the first to be affected by climate change and will suffer the worst, yet have done little or nothing to cause the problem. So, even with things such as this, naturally, if this was all above board and legitimate and the things that they were claiming were all true, then yeah, you could kind of see their point. But it's not true, because the narrative that they're peddling is false. And it really does, it's very similar, albeit subtly, to the oppressor and oppressed narrative. That's kind of my takeaway from it, because naturally we are the villain in this scenario and we need to atone for our sins, and the rest of the world is against us. Under our thumb, or under our boot, I should say, the heel of our boots. And, same thing is applicable here when we talk about climate change and the impacts. We won't face any, but they will, because they're under our thumb. Under our heel, sorry. So it also says that the negative impact of climate change are felt the most by those who are already vulnerable because of geography, poverty, gender, age, indigenous or minority status, and disability. And we, of course, can't be indigenous. That seems to be a forgotten concept when it comes to talking about European people, but for every other group, or indigenous in and of themselves, that's different kettle of fish. They reference David fucking Lammy, of all people. I'm not even entirely sure that I want to warrant that with a response. But, well, I might as well. He says that increasingly discussions of climate justice recognise that the climate emergency is linked to other forms of injustice. David Lammy highlights how the climate crisis is linked to patterns of historic and ongoing injustice in this TED Talk. Those countries that have contributed least to the climate breakdown, mainly in the global south, will suffer the most from floods, droughts and rising temperatures. This is a pattern of suffering with a long history. The exploitation of our planet's natural resources has been tied to the exploitation of people of colour. You're starting to notice where this is all sort of headed, yeah? There is undertones. It's not as clear-cut as simply mitigating the issues that are going to occur due to the man-made climate crisis, unless we all step in and save the day to prevent the man-made climate crisis. In the background, no, this is working. The logic of colonialisation was to extract valuable resources from our planet through force, paying no attention to its secondary effects. The climate crisis is, in a way, colonialism's natural conclusion. Climate justice is linked to racial justice, social justice, and intergenerational justice. I mean, how many different examples of justice can they conjure up? The list will get to a point where it could be classified as fucking endless. But, again, we're kind of harkening back to the idea of the time of the Industrial Revolution, the British Empire, colonialism and whatnot, but they completely forget to, or deliberately, should I say, miss out periods of time that we are aware of where the temperature was exponentially warmer than it is at present. And that was well before the days of carbon via industrial revolution, fossil fuel extraction, etc. But these are all forgotten. These are conveniently left out of conversations now. Even when we look at Greenland, which is now ice, there was a period of time where it was not the case at all. That used to be a luscious piece of land where there was a massive Viking settlement, if I remember correctly, reading about. And over time that froze over, and bit by bit it will in time begin to melt again. Any melting that occurs now, these people will immediately point to and says climate change, man-made climate change, formerly known as global warming. Point being, of course, that the planet fluctuates via its temperatures, as I said in the previous video, as I said before. But you have to be very careful what you say these days, because we've approached a period of time now where they've just completely managed to essentially pay off many scientists and threaten the other half of them, or climatologists, I should say, with funding cuts, etc. The other side of the argument has been completely stifled and suppressed, and they've managed to obtain a global consensus for the most part that there's a climate emergency. Therefore, that justifies never having to hear the other side of the argument ever again, and they get away with peddling nonsense and accelerating at the same time. Climate justice links human rights and development to achieve a human-centred approach, safeguarding the rights of the most vulnerable people and sharing the burdens and benefits of climate change and its impacts equitably and fairly. Climate justice is informed by science. It's informed by science, you see. So the climatologists hard at work, but they've always got a bit of time spare to talk about the climate justice. Fucking what? Wow. Cringe. Responds to science. Climate justice is informed by science, responds to science, and acknowledges the need for equitable stewardship of the world's resources. Equitable stewardship of the world's resources, yeah. And how do you think we would be able to achieve such a marvellous and inspirational feat? Well, of course, that will be taking things off us, and then, in theory, to redistribute to the less, or the countries of the world that have done the least to contribute. Will the things that are taken off us ever reach their intended target? Well, that remains to be seen. But before we ever get to figure out that answer to that burning question, it will still have been removed by us, or from us. So, we've got climate justice and global citizenship, or education. It remains underdeveloped and poorly grasped. As a concept in Scottish education, this was one of the key findings of research published in early 2021. Teachers require training and resources in order to do climate justice education. We need a teaching workforce who understand intersectionality, who are committed to universal human well-being with our planetary boundaries, and equipped with the skills to explore those issues with young learners. Taking a global citizenship approach enables teachers to promote hope and a sense of agency, counteracting eco-anxiety. This resource doesn't tell learners what to think and do about the climate emergency, but provides stimuli for critical thinking, debate and discussion to guide informed action. And then it says here, objects and structure of the resource. The resource falls are inform, investigate and instigate model, and aims to support teachers and learners to explore the current human rights impact of the climate emergency on people's lives in Scotland and Somalia, make connections with the universal quest for equitable access to food, water, healthcare, education, gender justice and racial justice. So there's another excuse to continue to promote and push feminism and anti-racism. And when we're talking about food equity, well, I've already touched upon that. Water equity, that will probably boil down to at some point in the future. This is mere speculation because there's nothing that I could point to say that that's a clear-cut fact. But I would presume, that private entities will obtain, control over, say, Scottish Water or Highland Water, for example, and it will be under their control, and it will be split evenly under the guise of equity, etc. But again, will it ever reach the intended targets? Probably not, because it's not really about that. You think about it, the multi-billionaires and the Ted Turners and the Bill Gates, etc., the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, these types of individuals who have got millions, if not billions, in their bank accounts, they have the ability themselves to help the people that they proclaim and profess in time will be helped by, the global citizenship approach. We have to go through all this nonsense in order to achieve this beautiful, namby-pamby, wishy-washy, equitable world when they could just part with a couple of million, maybe even a billion between them, and they might be able to help mitigate some of these issues or provide some of the things that are essential. But nah, it can't occur that way because resources are scarce at present, and realistically we have to atone for our sins. You see? Anyway, it also says, I read that, fuck's sake. The focus of this resource is not to explore the greenhouse effect. Climate science, that just fucking irritates me when they do that. Climate science. The science is settled. That's not how science works. The ecological crises, quote unquote, are biodiversity loss, the ecological crisis. Everything's a crisis these days. Absolutely everything's a crisis these days. And the vast majority of these crises, as they come and go, they're all manufactured, at least in part. Very conveniently placed, don't you think? One after the other. We believe it's possible to explore climate justice and take action without a deep knowledge of climate science. For teachers who wish to ensure learners have a background understanding of climate science, the Royal Society of Chemistry have created a list of other helpful resources you can engage with before, during or after using this resource. But I must take a moment to take a deep breath and be thankful that we don't actually have to discuss too much in depth the greenhouse effect or climate science, because I know that Susan might be watching, and me stepping out of line and saying something that I shouldn't, that contradicts the narrative that's being peddled by the likes of Bill Gates and, Nicola Finlips, etc., or Laura Slater, Patrick Communist Harvey, these types of non-entities. I ran the risk of promoting fallacies, and that's grounds for hate speech, is it not? So we've got here CFE experiences and outcomes. The overarching experiences and outcomes are from social studies. However, each lesson offers the opportunity for E's and O's from other curricular areas. Impact of climate change in Scotland and Somalia. And then obviously this is teacher information. So obviously the teacher has to familiarise himself with these talking points and this knowledge, and if they don't think that they're capable of doing this, then they'll just roll out one of their global citizenship rubber stamped educators and our experts to fill them in and re-educate them, blow their minds with all things equality. So oh fuck. So let's see what it says. I can describe the physical processes of a natural disaster and discuss its impact. Having investigated processes which form and shape landscapes, I can explain their impact on selected landscapes in Scotland, etc. Exploring injustice, now that's more like it. I can use evidence selectively to research current social, political or economic issues. Selectively being the operative word there, I would assume. I can gather and use information about forms of discrimination against people in societies and consider the impact this has on people's lives. Again, selectively. I can compare the social and economic differences between more or less economically developed countries and can discuss the possibilities for reducing these differences. I can use my knowledge of current social, political or economic issues to interpret evidence and present an informed view. By comparing the lifestyle and culture of citizens in another country with those of Scotland, I can discuss the similarities and differences. I can describe how the interdependence of countries affects levels of development, considering the effects on people's lives. Interdependence is a word that we're hearing more and more often as well these days. Links to the SDGs in the UNCRC. Well, there is no smoke without fire, as I've said before. And, well, as I also said that whenever there's a mention of global citizenship, you can bet your bottom dollar that you will then come to find SDG-related content not too far after the fact. And, of course, it mentions the UNCRC because, again, it really does appear to me that ever since this was brought to the forefront and promoted and presented to children, so much so that children in turn ended up demanding it was implemented faster than it inevitably was, even though it's not yet. But it will be soon. But that was the precursor. It was the justification required to accelerate the politicisation of children. As a climate justice resources material will support learning beyond Goal 13, which is climate change, with explicit focus on Goal 1. I should know that. And I can't remember. Anyway, Goal 10, reduced inequalities. Goal 11, Goal 12 and Goal 16. Oh fuck, I can't remember. Well, we'll soon find out. The key UNCRC article that this resource supports learners to engage with is Article 24. The right of all children everywhere to live in a safe and clean environment with clean air, clean water and access to nutritious foods and healthcare. Rich countries should help poorer countries achieve this. The resource also highlights individual relevant articles within each lesson. Okay. Teacher information again. The climate in Scotland and Somalia. Human-induced climate change is already impacting many weather and climate extremes in every area of the globe. Human-induced, of course. Climate's always changing. The tactical changing of the word from global warming to climate change. This is something I assume the children won't be aware of, nor will they be taught about. Of course they fucking won't. But they'll know all there is to know about human-induced climate change, but never ever hear the other side of the argument, like that big burning ball of fire in the sky that plays a role, for one, amongst other things. Solar activity, to name another, and the fact the climate is always changing. It's never statutory. It never has been. So naturally it will change, for better or for worse, for warmer or for colder. But no matter how it changes, no matter what weather events occur as a result of, they will point to it and say, that's not normal. You shouldn't be doing that. Based on fucking what, exactly, is the question. Anyway, across Europe, temperatures and sea levels will rise. Well, they've been saying that for a very, very long time, and they've not really have they. Well, they talk about coastal flooding and loss of shorelines, but you've got the likes of Barack Obama, for example, buying multi-million pound mansions on shorelines. And he's not the only one. A good portion of these people that peddle this bullshit do the exact same thing. They've all got, or a lot of them all have properties in areas that you would assume they would not, if the things that they insisted were real were in fact real. Hot extremes, marine heat waves and severe coastal flooding are projected to increase across Africa. Projected, again, being the operative word. There's nothing to suggest that 10, 15 years from now the planet might, in and of itself, just go the opposite way and cool down again, because even during the 1900s there was fluctuations that seemed to be miraculously non-existent when you look at the graphs provided by these people to prove their points. It's very strange, that. Very fucking strange. Anyway, let's see. So we got a comparison of Scotland and Somalia here. Even with adaptation and mitigation on a world scale, Scotland's average temperatures will increase. Together with increased rainfall and likelihood of severe storms, sea levels will rise. You know, they always say this, like 2mm a year, like it has been for the longest time. I'm pretty sure it's about 2mm a year, but there was parts of the world that should be underwater by now, according to the likes of Al Gore. Did that happen? No. Sea levels will rise. Climate change brings threats and opportunities to Scotland, whilst warmer winters may produce some health benefits. Climate change brings significant risks to the natural environment and infrastructure, flooding risks to communities and business, and significant impacts on natural carbon stores, agriculture, wildlife, coastal habitats and seas. Whereas in Somalia, across the Horn of Africa, the impact, or Somaliland, whatever the fuck that is, I'm not going to lie, I don't know. If it's Somalia, then fair enough. An ongoing drought has already been felt. In a 2015 study led by Jennifer Turney of the University of Arizona, it was found that the Horn of Africa is drying at an unprecedented rate, resulting in drought and famine and threatening food security in an already vulnerable region. But this is an area of the world that's been renowned for being astronomically warm. But again, if we look at historical context, for example, the Sahara Desert, I'm pretty sure that's the one, that used to be luscious green. I wouldn't call it a rainforest of sorts, but it used to be vegetation at one point in time, and now it's just sand. Things change, the climate changes, and even if they can point to things that are legitimately happening, the reasoning or the blame that they place as to why it is occurring is the issue here. So even if they can prove the things that they insist are happening, that's fine. But what's not acceptable is what you claim is responsible for creating what you've managed to prove. That's probably a better way of wording it. The climatological cycle of the East African monsoon is complex, as it depends not only on seasonal shifts and prevailing winds, but also on the heating and cooling of parts of the Indian Oceans. It's uniquely exposed climatically, as there's no rivers. The traditional pastoral economy involving moving livestock to the plateau areas in the summer has shrunk, and people had to move to internally displaced people camps around the main cities. Right, let's just stop reading this shite and get to some of the other stuff. No offense. So we've got a multitude of hyperlinks to go through if you so choose, such as dynamic Earth climate and sustainability. That sounds riveting, absolutely riveting. UNICEF glossary of climate language, climate glossary for young people. Oh, I wonder. Anyway, let's keep going. Conscious of time, it always seems to occur with videos like this. But anyway, these activities are designed to provide you and your learners with a sense of what their understanding, values and attitudes are before you begin teaching. Please avoid the temptation to explain anything. There is no learning intention. The activities will be revisited at the end of the learning block, so you and the learners can reflect on why their opportunities or feelings might have changed. I'd like to know how they used to refer to pupils or kids in a school setting before all this bullshit became as prominent as it is. Were they always referred to as learners, or is this just one of their new sort of words now to sort of disassociate the reality, when the reality is they are children that they're talking about, but they're always defined as learners? I could be barking up a irrelevant tree there, I'm not sure. Anyway, So it says here that ideally it's recommended that the hypothetical classroom would be split into two groups, with one doing a word cloud to begin with, while the other does a agree disagree sort of challenge or statement type thing, and then they swap over. So choose some or all of the statements, write out on posters and display them around your classroom. Use music to encourage learners to carousel individually and record their positions anonymously. You may wish to play devil's advocate and include one or two rogue dots so the first learners don't follow what they think their peers have said. Yada yada. So then we've got some examples. Climate change is due to human behaviour. Scotland won't be affected by climate change. Possible consequences of climate change have been exaggerated. Yes, they have. It's just animals and sea life that are most affected. Humans just need to provide scientific solutions to climate change. Climate change has nothing to do with human rights. These are all things that you'll be schooled on if you have the audacity to disagree with. Climate change has nothing to do with racism. Fucking doesn't, but they're going to tell you all there is to know about it, be rest assured. Climate change has nothing to do with gender equality. Of course it does. The feminists, the misogyny. Climate change is misogynistic, only governments and big companies can do anything about climate change. No, of course not. You need to micromanage. Climate change is only happening slowly over time. Well, it's what's always happening, that's the point. Climate change doesn't have anything to do with me. It doesn't really. Absolutely fuck all, really. Grand scheme of things. Pale in significance to the natural changing of said climate. I'm not even a climatologist and I know these things, but yet these children probably will never know because they're being brainwashed. And then as for this aspect of it, I asked learners to either draw or brainstorm the words that describe how they feel about the climate emergency and what it means to them. So naturally, in order for them to be able to do this, they'll have to be introduced to the climate emergency to begin with, which in and of itself I find to be abhorrent. You can use as many words as they can think of, and they can be conflicting because that's an honest response, blah blah blah. Anyway, it says down here, let's continue on. Climate change and rights in Scotland. Sustainable development goals. Reduced inequalities. Which has a very hidden undertone that some are not aware of because it's not what it says in the tin. By and large, reduced inequalities incorporates mass migration, but that's not what it says directly underneath it when it gives you the brief definition. And then, of course, Goal 13, climate action. And then in regards to the UNCRC, it says the right to live in a safe and healthy environment, the right to relax, play and take part freely in cultural activities, because without the UNCRC's miraculous interventions, children they never had the right to play. And now they do. Thanks for that. To introduce the concept of climate justice is a suggested learning intention. To understand the impact of climate change on communities and cultural heritage in Scotland. But again, we're talking about children here, so they want to introduce the concept, or it's suggested that it should be introduced to children to talk about climate justice. Yes. And the myriad bullshit that comes along with it. Learning activities, prior learning, recap, or introduce children's human rights. Explore with learners how rights and justice might be related. You can use some of the rights activities here. So it gives you a wee hyperlink. Give learners flip chart paper with climate justice in the middle and ask them to write, draw, or otherwise record the responses to what the phrase means to them. As a class, watch video 1 and 2 and then zoom into the area using the interactive possible future map. Discuss which rights might be affected now in the future. I'm not going to watch that. Time is of the essence, so to speak. Show this video from the Philippines. Do learners have anything else they'd like to add now to their climate justice word clouds? I remember her from COP. I have to be honest here, and I don't mean to sound too derogatory, so and being conscious of trying not to sound too derogatory, I'll just say this much: she was fucking insufferable, absolutely insufferable. And the proverbial climate change nonsense was espoused, but there was just fucking, least said the better. Communities globally most affected by climate change are those who have oppression in their recent history and or current lived experience. Discuss loss of culture and heritage as a global justice issue using the agree-disagree statement. Scottish Government money for supporting communities affected by climate change should only be spent in Scotland. If your class has studied the Highland clearances or the transatlantic slave trade, it is vital here to support them to make these connections by using this resource. Well, does that mean me as a Highlander that I get to bask in the joy of being pandered to and bootlicked? Do I get all the goodies? No, of course I don't. I can guarantee that any references to the Highland clearances will pale in significance to the talk of the transatlantic slave trade, which will be spoken about solely as a concept in and of itself. They will negate every other point in history where slavery was a thing, including that whole period of time and beforehand. Who sold the slaves? Who owned the majority of the slave ships? And on top of that, the adjacent slave trade that was occurring at the time, the Barbary slave trade, which continued after the fact. And of course, they will fail to, at any point, discuss who ended slavery. Yeah, things to consider that the children will never know about. Presumably. So then it goes on to talk about children's rights and climate change. We've got here Article 24, I have the right to good quality health care, clean water, good food. Article 22, I am a refugee. I have the same rights as children born in that country. I have the right to an education. I have the right to a proper house, food and clothing. I have a right to relax and play, to be supported, to live and grow. Adults must do what's best for me. I have the right to be listened to and taken seriously, which justifies politicising them. I have the right to find out and share information. And again, I could go back to that photo I've shared a few times, but you get the point. Keeping connected in Scotland. This is another learning activity. Referencing again Article 12 this time. Children and young people have the right to be listened to and taken seriously. And they have the right to find out and share information. Learning activities. The suggested learning intention, is to understand the impact of climate change on our daily access to transport, energy and technology. Learning activity, a starter as a whole class, explore this article about the rest and be thankful. Discuss the issues together and create a whole class why chain. I don't know what the article in question is about, so I'll have a quick look, but I can't focus too much on it. Shut for 4 days due to rain. A83 at rest and be thankful. Chaos continues. Okay. Fuck off. Let's have a wee gooch. Road engineers have confirmed that the notorious A83 at rest and be thankful. Piss off, It was reopened on a convoy basis on Tuesday morning following a safety inspection and improved weather forecast. Details of the latest closure came a matter of days after the Rest and Be Thankful campaign warned that the business will go to the wall by the end of the year because of an over 15-year failure to prevent slips on the key route. There have been 7 months of disruptions on the road due to landslides, and the threat of falling boulders. The trunk road has been shut since Saturday due to heavy rain. A yellow Met Office warning for heavy rain in Argyll has since been stood down and reduced to cover an area further north with less rain anticipated. All traffic was directed to use the single track Old Military Road on a convoy basis. Okay, well, we had a bit of rain. I would guess though there'll be something to take away from that that's shocking. They split the class into groups and allocate each a different scenario that's already happening to communities living in Scotland as a result of extreme weather. Occasional extreme weather. It doesn't happen all the time. The weather isn't calm 24/7. This is my point though. They point to outliers or periods of time, moments in time where the weather acts out of the ordinary. And they classify that as extreme weather, and they then attribute that to man-made climate change, and thus we're responsible. Power cuts due to pylons being blown down in a storm. Storms occur. Roads closed due to flooding. There's a myriad of reasons as to why flooding occurs, and it's not just a case of lots of rain. Landslides causing trains to cancel, internet being shut down. What else have we got up here? It's important here to be aware of eco-anxiety. Ensure that you discuss how these communities have been resilient and how people support each other, but that clearly more needs to be done. Each group should use the UNCRC graphics from page 8 to identify the rights, blah, 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 blah. Right, okay. Whose voices should be heard and taken seriously in climate change action planning? In groups, learners should create a sorting grid and flip chart, similar to the example on the next page. They should then sort out the voice cards on the next page into the most important, quite important, and least important. Oh, I wonder what this will be about. And then finally, obviously, it says here that what does participation really mean? Look at the extended wording of UNCRC Article 12 and 13 to discuss these questions. I will not do that for time saving reasons. Keeping connected in Scotland, and we've got young people in primary. This is obviously what you would rearrange into who's most important, presumably. Thin lips is included. The Secretary General of the UN, children under the age of 5, elderly people, voters, local councillors, directors of companies, blah blah blah. And then we've got obviously least important, quite important, etc. Climate change and rights in Somalia. Just kind of got the impression I'm going to have to start to skip some of this just because it's reaching the hour mark again. We've got what similarities, ask learners in pairs or threes to share what makes them feel at home, what possessions, food or even rituals connect learners to feelings of home, what similarities and differences do they notice in each other's responses. Okay. In 2018, Somalia saw a drop in rainfall of 50 to 75%. This was the third year in a row of severe drought, and the situation has continued since. In groups, learners should read Haboon's real life story and create questions for another group to explore more of the following. Okay, wonderful stuff. Pick on where Haboon's family ended up. Do you learners think she was still in Somalia at this point? And blah blah fucking blah. As a class, revisit the world's cloud for at home. Are there any more words learners would now add now that they've learned more about climate-induced migration or migrants? Oh, of course. Give those same groups... let me read this a bit. In groups, learners do the migration definition matching activity. Make the connections between Haboon's family as an internally displaced and the family in New Orleans. What family in New Orleans? Okay. Give those same groups a newspaper story about migration. Ideally, you can find up-to-date articles, but if not, you can use our learner version. What questions would learners like to ask the journalists? Let's see this quickly. Bordering on madness. Record 202 migrants make it across the channel to Kent in a single day as ministers call on Home Office to get a grip of border farce. Border farce is the operative words, of course, but 202... Wow, times have changed. If anything, it's got fucking worse. But it's remarkable, is it not? That was 2000. That was 2020, and since then it's just escalated, despite all the promises to the contrary that it would be solved. As a class, revisit the world. I read that. Now they've learned more about climate-induced migration. So let me get Haboon's little story here, and I don't give a shit. And then we've got the matching game, human cards. Fucking hell. So this is obviously for migration. A human who moves from one region to or country to another. A human who is made claim to be considered for refugee status to a state which has signed the convention, which is something that we need to pull out of immediately. There's always they're human beings. Yes, just humans. Nobody said they weren't, but that still isn't going to conjure up sympathy for me. Well, that's what you're trying to create here. We've got a human who has been forced to flee their home, but who has not crossed an internationally recognised state border. Being undocumented does not constitute a crime. This term denies innate dignity and human rights. And being undocumented, no, it's an illegal immigrant. What the fuck? Self-explanatory, like. It's an illegal immigrant. They've broken the law. So, undocumented is being polite, if anything. It's giving them some dignity to spare. A human whose individual application for protection has been recognised under the UN Convention, and a human who seeks refuge, asylum or safety. And then the definition cards: refugee, migrant, asylum seeker, legal immigrant, internally displaced person. And then the teacher gets their own little definitions here. So, what the fuck, right? There's 2 refugees in it, I just noticed that. So we've got recognised immigration status, granted leave to remain, and then we've got the umbrella term for all seeking sanctuary from persecution. So, okay, I see. Bordering on madness, record 202 migrants. So this is them talking about that story. I can skip that, obviously. Voices from Somalia. No, I think we'll probably pass on that as well, if it's all the same. Unless there's some hot take away from it all, which I doubt too much. Oh, fuck me. Look at this. Look at this, man. I mean, this has been conjured up with the intention to be presented to children. Intersectionality. Another leftist theory that's just been promoted as if it's fact. And then we've got obviously mentions of the articles. The learning intention for this is to understand how creating conditions for climate justice also means improving the lives of many who are experiencing discrimination, to understand how young people are using creative activism to have their voices heard. And if the powers that be, the state and whatnot, didn't want their voices to be heard, they fucking wouldn't be heard. But the point is they are, from behind the scenes, so to speak, encouraged to every avenue. Starter, who's more at risk from discrimination in society, both in Scotland and around the world? You could share the examples of direct and indirect discrimination from the CYPS. What is that like? Is this something I should be? Oh, yeah, I'm aware of this. Shit. I haven't been on this website in a while. All children have these rights. Beautiful stuff. Non-discrimination. Okay, I don't know, fuck it. I can't be bothered. Oh, wait. In pairs, learners should read the hurricanes case study in the next page, then discuss if an evacuation order was to happen in your local area, who would be able to leave quickly and where would they go, who wouldn't be able to leave quickly, etc. Okay, I don't know what that is, what they're referring to. To be honest, what questions would you ask them, whatever. Pairs feedback to the class and their discussions. How do learners feel about how the hurricanes disproportionately affected black, poor, elderly and women residents? Oh, fuck off. Just fuck off. Make the point that the effects of climate change are felt most by the very vulnerable, whether that's in the global south or in the global north. So all the little groups that these individuals, not limited to the fuckers that are promoting this nonsense, but they're included, but all the different groups that have been branded as, marginalised, oppressed victims, oppressed categorisations and whatnot, they all, by default then, experience all the traumas of the day, all the ills of society. They're always hard done by, because it's always about beating the white man over the head, because it goes back to something that I'm almost certain I said near the beginning of this video, that you can see similarities between the oppressed and oppressor narrative, sort of hidden in and around this bullshit. So it has to be stressed that, all of the different groups that are classified as marginalised, vulnerable, oppressed, etc., they're all going to experience the ills of climate change more disproportionately, of course, because they never do anything wrong, it's just us, the white man. Irrespective of whether it's the global north, global south, they will all feel the pain because they are not white men. As a class, watch this video of Vanessa and Nikati. How does this make learners feel in groups? Learners watch one video from young climate activists in Scotland and one from another country. Oh, okay. Glasgow Young Strikers. And we've got Scottish Highlands Brenda from Malawi, etc, etc. Just fuck off, young climate activists, huh? Okay. Climate justice action. With the learning intention, being to understand the purpose of COP and to think critically about climate action messaging and communications. Wow. This just gonna skip that as well, if I'm being totally honest.
Hi, my name is Ashanti and I'm 16 and I go to Kelvinside Academy. I feel like so far response from the government and politicians in general has been, we'll add it onto our list of problems so we can seem like we're for the cause, but we won't make it our main priority. And I feel like there has to come a point where you decide that yes, your climate emergency is actually an emergency, and stop trying to beat around the bush and trying to people please and actually get stuff done.
They've declared a climate emergency, but they're not legally obligated to take any action, and it's just ridiculous. The whole world is about to kind of collapse in front of us and no one seems to be doing anything.
I wonder which riveting textbook she read that from, but again, this that kind of goes back to the empowerment argument that I've made many times before, because these children, teenagers and children alike, were encouraged through many spheres, whether that was activists in general, mainstream media, their teachers, etc. They were encouraged to go out and demand imminent action, and they've got a right to be heard. All this shit. And eventually the government had all but pretended that they had their arms twisted and, pledged to do more. And we never heard the end of it since, here in Scotland anyway. You really mean to tell me that if it wasn't for these manufactured, totally not organic by the way, protests that took place not just across Scotland but everywhere, if it wasn't for that, and it wasn't for the groundbreaking bullshit that they all regurgitated when they took to the cameras and stood behind their megaphones, if it wasn't for all that, Nicola Sturgeon wouldn't have had her arm twisted. You know, the governments around the world, they wouldn't have had their arms twisted. No. Or is it more safe to assume that this was always in the pipeline anyway? Useful idiots. And it's quite sad, really, when we're talking about it in the context of children. Anyway, we're getting to the end of this, I think. We must be. We've got taking action for climate justice. Well, because it's just getting too long as a video now. As a class, watch this video of a young activist for inspiration. What if we can't get onto the streets to protest like Greta and Vanessa? What other ways can we have our voices heard about climate injustice? Oh, I don't know. The A to Z, equity. Conversations about climate change include fairness, rights, and climate justice. Just in case you weren't aware. Justice, climate action, safeguard the rights of the most vulnerable in society. So fuck the white man, it's only the most vulnerable in society. Listen carefully to those most affected by the man-made climate change. Listen also to those resistant to take action. You mean people that have more than 5 brain cells and are aware of the other side of the argument. Yeah. Media organisations should provide platforms for climate activism, but they should not provide any platform whatsoever to somebody who will disagree with the narrative at play here. We even had Lorna Slater not too long ago complaining all day long about how racist and anti-Semitic it was to have the audacity to express concerns with the Gender Recognition Act, and she even threw shade at the BBC for showing quote unquote a sort of a balanced view, aka they had somebody on that did echo those points of being concerned, but she also criticised them for them occasionally having balanced views of climate change, which I did find remarkable to hear because I wasn't aware of that. But apparently the BBC were airing some people, I wouldn't imagine they were off the mindset that it's a load of shit, but maybe we'd go so far as to suggest that the people in question that the BBC would have incorporated there, or included there I should say, would be people who don't necessarily think that the absolute radical extremist nonsense that the climatologists in question peddle, they probably go out of their way to debunk that as opposed to debunking the overall narrative at play here. Anyway, and tell stories about the climate crisis through poverty, creative writing, drama. Nah, I fucking won't do that. The voices of those most affected by climate change are at the centre of decision making. Oh, of course they will be. Of course they will be. At the end of this work, learners should look back at the responses for the baseline agree, disagree word cloud activities. Repeating the agree, disagree activity can serve to tell you how their learning has evolved. It's important to reiterate to learners that there is not necessarily a right or wrong amount of moving in the agree-disagree line. Everyone progresses at their own pace and it's fine provided they progress though, because you can't regress and you can't deviate, you must progress. You must become a good global citizen. As you repeat the word cloud about the emotions brought on by the issue of the climate change, ensure you will allow space to debrief any equal anxieties that you will have generated by creating a notion, an idea that the planet is on the brink of extinction. Again, it's fucking disgusting. You could make the argument that it's child abuse, but it's fine. They managed to prevent any tears from forming, any genuine equal anxiety, because the false empowerment routine comes in pretty swiftly. Also alludes to whatever. No, I will leave it at that, I think. So, apologies for it being a bit long, but you get the point. It's just, I don't know, I'm fucking sick of this shit. I really am. There was this Highland thing here. What the fuck is this? I don't know. Throughout history, people have searched for and fought over land that is a source of power and the basic economic engine upon which entire civilizations have been built. For some cultures, land and the resources contained within it are viewed as something which should be shared for the benefit of everyone, whilst for others it is viewed as something that cannot be owned exclusively for an individual gain. For those who secure access to and control over land, it can be a source of great power and prosperity, but for those who lose access, the result can be extreme poverty. Struggle over land is a central issue in Scotland's history. In many ways, the experience of Scotland is similar to that of developing countries that have experienced colonialism. I mean, I don't disagree, but all that came to mind there was that some of these people peddle the idea that we're trying to break away from the colonial empire when we were oppressed too. It's like, we were just as involved as fucking England. Get a grip. Anyhow, so yeah, they do mention Highland clearances here. Says the Standard is a notorious episode which changed the physical and social landscape of Scotland forever. While Scotland has moved on from the land rights abuses, many poor communities around the world are facing the same scenario today. Okay. Anyway, I might look a bit more into this at some point, but time, and we've gone over an hour, and I hate doing that because I know that probably nobody's going to get to this point, but hey ho. Peace.